We're here, obviously, in a very venerable institution, RIBA, and through its doors over the years, a long list of very venerable architects and people who've passed through those doors. One of them, and apologies to those who've heard this before, in particular the Ordnance Survey, is a guy called Cedric Price. Cedric Price was an architect who worked in the UK in the 60s, and there's a quote that he made, which I think is still more and more resonant, particularly on events like today. And he said something along the lines of, if technology is the answer, what was the question? And certainly from my work previously in Manchester and ongoing now at Arup, is to continuously drill down into why are we deploying technology in our cities, what are the reasons for that? It's to make people's lives better, isn't it? To improve the outcomes that we're trying to achieve in our cities, to make business easier and more competitive. And that essentially, I think, goes down to something that perhaps hasn't been mentioned enough, which is around people. Although, of course, having a Dutch representative in Eric, we always know we're going to get reminders of the importance of people in designing and co-designing our smart cities. But it's not just about people like Tom. It's about working with those, perhaps in more of our disenfranchised, challenging communities, those who face the everyday challenges of living their lives, and who know what the challenges are, not necessarily come up with the technology solutions, that is for the Toms of this world, but to engage with those communities because they're the ones that understand what goes on in a city very, very well indeed. When in Rome, talk Cedric Price. Okay. I'm going to talk briefly about a project called Triangulum, and we heard earlier from Irene, I don't know if she's still here, about the Grow Smarter initiative, and it's part of a similar European programme funded under Horizon 2020, which I think the UK is still eligible for. But it's one of a number of projects looking at establishing smart city districts, and very much the focus being on integrating energy, transport and ICT, and critically at scale. However, before I go on to that, one of the lesser-known transfer deals during the close season was my move, as I was alluded to, from Manchester City Council to Arup. You all know Arup, so I'm not going to do that pitch. But for some years, I think Arup has guessed a number of organisations have been working closely with cities and city governments to help them better understand, I guess, the digital opportunities that exist, but also the challenges for cities as well in overcoming some of the issues that they face. And those cities obviously include work you're going to hear later on from Paula around London, Copenhagen, Singapore and New York. And really this is very much now about, yes, creating a vision and a strategy for a city, but also helping them to undertake critical service redesign, work that some of the American cities have done, creating innovation agencies within their local authorities, and also digital master planning, which we'll touch upon briefly. Because digital, yes, is a sector in itself, but perhaps uniquely, it permeates across a whole raft of sectors in terms of them and addressing some of the challenges that they need to do to grow their sectors. So this is a quick 3D screenshot of a corridor in Manchester. I won't do a straw poll who's been there. However, this is a 2.5 kilometre length, the yellow line, which runs, the map's going north, along the Oxford Road. And this is a strategically important route for the city. Going down the corridor, which, for those who don't know it, generates 25% of the city's GVA. So it's very important, not just for Manchester, also for the Northern Powerhouse, and I guess critically in terms of rebalancing the economy of the UK as well. So it's 2.5 kilometres long, about maybe a kilometre length, width rather, at its widest point in the top of the city there, the city centre. It's home to 75,000 students, and the employment rate is interesting because with 2 universities and the largest health research campus in the UK, 45% of those employed in the corridor are from the knowledge sector, so critically important in terms of driving innovation and ideas. But one thing I think was noticed by the City Council and its partners here, and the 2 universities, the health sector, and there's also a science park in there, which is one of the unique in its way, and it is a science park located right at an inner city core, is that while some of those institutions and the assets they offered were perhaps world class, it's probably fair to say that the interstitial space, in other words, the bit in between it, was far, far from world class. And that was the responsibility of the joint partnership. So in 2006, a partnership was developed, established, called the Corridor Board, which was led by the leader of the City Council, Sir Richard Leese, and the Vice-Chancellors of the universities at a very senior level, and that continues to exist. And the prime role of that board was to develop initiatives that brought together those institutions to create a joined-up view in the world around public realm, around transport, and around energy. And since that board was established, a whole raft of issues have come through, but it's very much seen as certainly the city's innovative district, but arguably a critical piece in the jigsaw of UK PLC's innovation programme. I'm going to talk about Triangulum, but it's also recently been announced that this place will also be the UK city demonstrator for the Internet of Things, of which there are a number of partners involved in that project here today, but also as well the National Graphene Institute. I'll stick with this picture for a little bit longer, but essentially Triangulum is built around three core assets. You've got, I think it's purple, I'm a male, I'm slightly colourblind. The purple bit at the bottom is focused around the University of Manchester. Now they operate and manage their own electricity grid, as many large institutions do. The aim of the piece of work is to make that grid smarter. I'm not sure what a smart grid is, but I know when a grid starts to get smarter. We're also looking at the light blue area, which is Manchester Metropolitan University's campus, or at least their new campus over at Burley Fields. Similarly, they operate and manage their own electricity grid with aspirations for that to become a smart grid. And the reddy pinky bit in the centre is Manchester's core regional centre, where we're installing a new heat network collecting a range of buildings together. You notice the nice mix of red and blue there. So clearly trying to do everything across the city at one point in time is really incredibly challenging, and probably you will never actually achieve it. So we picked these three areas as core assets essentially to build upon, and within those assets there are obviously buildings. And the aim is to connect some of those buildings within those assets. So we have the University of Manchester is interesting because there you have an old institution with many listed buildings, and we all know working on energy efficiency in listed buildings is very challenging. So we took that because we thought it would be tough to do. The light blue piece is a more of a new build campus, and theoretically at least, easier to do in terms of selecting some of the buildings there. And the red area is again a new heat network being installed, so a new asset. So kind of a nice mix there of old and new and things that are being put into the ground. The aim of the energy piece is to essentially deploy new energy generation technologies across these buildings. And we're working with a range of partners on this. Critically, our core industrial partner has been Siemens, but we're having a range of innovation challenges around technology that could be deployed here, both in energy generation assets, but also energy storage and energy optimization as well. And those innovation challenges are about reaching out to the innovation community across the UK, the SMEs that exist, to enable them to perhaps play in this corridor with some of their kit and equipment. So whilst we're deploying a range of technologies into these grids, we're almost creating, if you like, three distinct decentralized energy systems, almost a blueprint for what a decentralized energy system in a city could look like. But there are two other components to these programs, the Lighthouse programs. One is transport and the other is ICT. Anybody been up and down the corridor? Got 1, 2, okay, about 10. So I cycle this route like a fool because it is the busiest bus route in Europe, I'm told, which is a challenge. And those of you, and I went to Imperial here as well, know the changes that have gone in terms of Exhibition Road. And what we're trying to create here is very much an Exhibition Road piece where you get that mix, that we're removing all cars from a 2.5 kilometre stretch of road, which is a challenging decision. And that decision would have only been reached through a corridor board structure. Individual institutions are going to be very difficult for them to come to that decision, but collectively they can make that. And that will change the whole environment, make it much more attractive. So the other piece we're doing is along that yellow line is removing all private cars, and there's work ongoing to do that now. But that creates challenges in itself in terms of particularly around last mile delivery to some of these institutions. So we'll be deploying cargo bikes, again a Dutch invention, but partly powered by electricity generated from the assets that we produce from those buildings in the project. And the third and final piece to the jigsaw is a new ICT system called the Manchester Eye. And this, I think, is a connection into smart metering, because that Manchester Eye will collect data from all of these assets in terms of energy generation, energy use, storage, and the transport piece as well. So we'll have a much better feel for when energy is used at a particular point in time. And for people and organisations, big business like Siemens, they can then start to business plan how they might roll out something at a commercial level elsewhere. So very briefly, the main activities around energy, yes, are around building optimisation. These are very, very different buildings, and we chose that deliberately. We might regret it in 5 years' time when the project finishes, but they're all very different. We're also looking at how we might simulate connection and disconnection from the grid, bearing in mind we've got a whole raft of academics across these institutions, and if you turn off the power, they won't be particularly happy around an experiment they're running 24/7. So it is around the simulation initially. Critically as well, we've got 75,000 students, and I guess many of us have been students, but there's an opportunity to use those students, if you like, as guinea pigs, as part of this process, to engage with them as arguably the knowledge sector workers of the future. And with the Manchester Eye, create, if you like, a central control as to how we might simulate, again, turning some of this energy on and turning energy off and seeing what the impacts would be. Again, around transport, I've alluded to the work we're doing around the cargo bike, and critically those will be charged from some of the new generation solar PVs that will be deployed on MMU's buildings, and replacement of existing fleet. Critically as well, I think as part of this, we'll be monitoring, tracking not just the distances that those vehicles go, but how much energy they use and when, because that will effectively affect the critical demand and load and peak periods that cities need to plan for. And then finally, we've got work that's ongoing around the ICT structure, which is around, first of all, creating an open data and service engine that pulls together all of that data from across the corridor, and then creating a platform whereby that data can be released to a range of organisations, third parties, who can access that and develop applications which are of value to not just people who live and work in the corridor, but elsewhere, hopefully, as well. So Arup have helped develop a number of city models, and this is, I think, a critical piece of this, because a lot of this information sits behind spreadsheets, but increasingly decisions are being made where more informed decisions using visualization techniques. And here we see what the corridor will look like, and the use of a range of segregated cycle lanes here going past the university institutions. On the left, you've got a sense there, and this does need some more rendering, is the University of Manchester's Grade 1 listed building. So that's one of the buildings that is part of the project, which, as I said, articulated, is going to be challenging. We're now moving towards the city centre, an awful lot of buses, as you can see, and hopefully increasing bikes. But there will be no private vehicles apart from taxis on this route, which is as I say, a really brave decision, which came to by the partners and on a collective basis, not something we could have done individually. And then we passed the second university in the city, Manchester Metropolitan University. Again, their campus is being used for deployment of a range of energy generation assets. And in the distance, you can see the city centre where the heat network will be. So thank you very much for your time, and happy to answer questions later on.